Hi. If you've been following this series, then you already know that one of the strangest things about human culture is that they keep reporting them in recurring shapes. Omen beings, trickster beings, dead adjacent beings, things that seem to appear at thresholds and in dreams, on lonely roads, in rituals and in breakdowns. And Christian demons belong to that larger archive of hidden intelligence, but with a difference. And I think they're what happens when the old ambiguous middle gets dragged into a cosmic war. Yes, demons are strange, but they're also prosecuted, judged, and moralized. I think they're what the unseen looks like after theology has chosen a side. I think to best understand that, we have to begin with the word itself. The English word demon sounds like a verdict. It arrives in the air already accompanied by condemnation. But the Greek words daimon and daimonion did not begin there. As classicists and historians of religion note, the ancient Greek category could range from a god to a lesser divine being, to an intermediary spirit, to a power that might be helpful or harmful depending on the context. The older daimonic field is one reason the word could describe the sign of Socrates, or mediating intelligence, without yet meaning the horned villain of our later imagination. The moral black paint comes later. In English, the later theological judgment is built into the term itself, but in Greek antiquity it was not built in at the start, as you can see. Or here, I guess. One of the great turning points happens when Jewish scripture is translated into Greek. In the Septuagint, language from the Hebrew Bible that targets wrongful sacrifice and foreign divine powers gets rendered with daimonia language. Deuteronomy 32 says Israel sacrificed to demons, not God. And Psalm 106 says sons and daughters were sacrificed to demons, which I also mentioned in the Shedem episode, if you haven't listened to that, but that's neither here nor there. Recent scholarship on the Septuagint stresses that this was not yet identical to the Christian idea of demons as a neatly defined race of evil spirits, but it is kind of a huge shift. The Greek term is now being used polemically as part of the contrast between the God of Israel and rival sacrificial beings or cultic objects. The word is beginning to slide, as you can see, and the middle is narrowing. By the time we get to the New Testament, that narrowing has become much more intense. Demons in the gospel are usually unclean spirits, and that phrasing is important to note. The emphasis isn't just on their metaphysical badness, but it's more that they contaminate and degrade and unmake all around them. They speak through bodies. They recognize Jesus before the crowds do. They produce convulsions, shrieking, seizures, self-harm, and social exile. I know it's easy to look at demons like symbolic villains or some background scenery, but they're part of the gospel announcement that something larger is being confronted. Jesus does not merely teach better ethics in a neutral universe. He enters a world that's already under hostile occupation, at least from this perspective. And one of the crucial details, which is often lost in sloppy retellings, is that the New Testament doesn't flatten all suffering into demonic suffering. James D.G. Dunn points out that fever, leprosy, and paralysis are not automatically treated as possession. Demonization is used more specifically for states where the person seems overrun by an alien and dominating power. I think this is also important to pay attention to because it means the text itself is already more discriminating than a lot of later popular demon talk. The New Testament world does connect illness, evil, and satanic opposition, but it doesn't simply say that every malady is a demonic plague. Even at the start, the categories overlap without completely collapsing into each other. The story that everyone I've talked to seems to remember is the demonic associated with Legion from the Garrison account in Mark and its parallels. It is one of the strangest and most revealing scenes in the Gospels, at least from my limited exposure. The possessed man is beyond psychologically distressed. He's socially expelled. Physically, he's ungovernable. He's living in tombs, outside of ordinary life, in this weird zone between human community and just being dead. He's pretty fragmented, or at least spoken through by some kind of multiplicity. My name is Legion is not just a creepy line. It's a clear expression of occupation, about some kind of plurality existing where there should just be personhood, about a body turned into some kind of contested territory. When the spirits are expelled into swine and rush toward destruction, the story reads as healing, judgment, purification, and military expulsion all at once. The restored man is then found clothed, seated, and in his right mind. We shouldn't look at the exorcism as a spectacle. It's the return of personhood. Then there's Mary Magdalene, who is said in Luke 8 and Mark 16 to have had 7 demons cast out of her. Here I have to be careful, because Christian imagination and Christian text are not always the same thing. The gospel witness tells you that she had been profoundly afflicted, and that she later became one of the central witnesses to Jesus' death and resurrection. It does not tell you that the demons were sexual sins. It does not tell you that she was a prostitute. It does not invite the lazy move of turning 7 demons into a shorthand for a moral scandal. Later tradition added layers the text itself doesn't supply. What the Gospels do give us is severity, deliverance, and dignity. The woman once described through affliction becomes one of the first resurrection witnesses. Look at the reversal. It's important. Demons also belong to landscape in the New Testament. Jesus imagines an unclean spirit moving through the waterless places after expulsion, and that image isn't accidental. The demonic is repeatedly associated with wilderness, impurity, tombs, wastelands, pigs, storms, and social edges. This is a kind of symbolic geography of disorder. The demon belongs where creation thins out, where law and purity and community lose their grip. That is one reason the gospel exorcisms feel larger than private therapy. They're like a self-contained cosmic restoration. When Jesus expels demons, he's not just like improving someone's mood, he's reclaiming sacred territory. That is why exorcism in the Gospels functions simultaneously as healing, proof of authority, and announcement of the kingdom. Official Catholic catechetical teaching still points back to this logic. Jesus commissions his disciples into an exorcistic work that is part of the church's pastoral care, not some kind of freelance occult technique. In narrative terms, exorcism shows that teaching about God is not enough if bodies and minds remain under hostile dominion. Liberation must be enacted. The kingdom isn't merely argued, but it comes as a transfer of actual rule. I think that's why here, demons recognize Jesus before respectable observers do. They understand the jurisdiction. Once Christianity begins reflecting on all this, the demon category expands rapidly. Early Christians did not invent hostile spirits from nothing, but they did reorganize the map. The origin question itself is pretty revealing. The New Testament talks constantly about demons and only rarely explains where exactly they came from. Later Christian tradition often connected them with fallen angels, the rebellion of Satan, or the Watchers material known from Jewish apocalyptic literature. But another stream, equally important, identified the pagan gods themselves as demons, or at least as masks behind which demonic powers operated. So the category becomes some kind of grand sorting machine. Old gods, deceptive oracles, seductive powers, polluted cults, invading thoughts, and hostile intelligences all begin to get classified under one Christian heading. Now the word demon isn't just naming something, it's reorganizing the universe. You can hear that shift in Justin Martyr. In his first apology, he argues that what pagans mistook for gods were in fact evil demons. His explanation isn't subtle by modern standards, but it's historically decisive. Apparitions, terrors, corrupting visions, false divinities, even some of the violence done against truth-tellers like Socrates, Justin reads through a Christian demonological lens. The old daimonic middle is no longer this negotiable zone of intermediaries. It has been put on trial and overwhelmingly found guilty. Once that move is made, pagan religion no longer appears as an alternate route to the sacred. What we're presented with is a demonically compromised religion. Origen sharpens the point in a more philosophically elaborate way. In Contra Celsum, he insists that demons, in the Christian sense, are wicked powers that lead people away from God, not morally mixed helpers hanging out in between heaven and earth. At the same time, he preserves an important nuance. He knows the older Greek language and the philosophical debate around it, which is exactly why his rejection matters. He isn't ignorant of the intermediary model, he's outright refusing it. And for Origen, Christ's coming marks the destruction of demonic empire and the release of people from those powers. And this makes exorcism lose its sideshow-like quality. It's actual evidence that rival spiritual administrations are being displaced. Tertullian goes in an even more combative direction. On Idolatry and the Apology, he treats demons as tied to apostate angels, idolatrous cults, false healings, disasters, and sacrificial systems that feed unclean spirits. You can feel Christianity here absorbing older Jewish themes, Enochic themes, and Greco-Roman religious rivalry into one increasingly complete diagnosis. Demons aren't just private tempters anymore. They're this hidden infrastructure that animates temples, manipulates divination, and distorts worship itself. If Justin was the one that helped make pagan gods demonic, we could say Tertullian helps take demonology to the civilizational scale. With Athanasius of Alexandria and the monastic tradition, something completely different happens. The battlefield moves inward. In the life of Antony, demons still appear as external terrors, animal-like apparitions, noises, assaults, and phantasms. But Athanasius also keeps saying that the real signs are psychological and moral. Things like confusion, fear, hatred, lust, grief, instability, and the manipulation of thought. Good spirits bring calm and courage. Evil spirits bring clamor and disorientation. That's a major development. The demon is no longer only the thing screaming through the possessed man in public. It is also the thing that enters by image, atmosphere, or suggestion. The demonology of the desert is already all about attention. That inward turn becomes explicit in Evagrius Ponticus. Evagrius systematizes the 8 logismoi, the recurring tempting thoughts that later feed the tradition of the deadly sins: gluttony, lust, avarice, sadness, anger, acedia, vainglory, pride. Here, demons aren't discarded as pre-psychological superstition. They're used to describe patterned invasions of attention, desire, and fantasy. His famous noonday demon of Acedia is not just boredom, it's that oppressive mixture of restlessness, resentment, futility, aversion to productivity, and fantasy of escape that makes a person hate the very place where transformation could actually happen. In Evagrius, demons become extraordinarily subtle. They work through thoughts that don't feel wholly foreign and yet do seem to bend the soul toward complete disintegration. I think this is one of the reasons the desert literature still feels modern, even if you don't share its metaphysics. It understood that temptation is not always a dramatic invitation to obvious evil. Sometimes it arrives as interpretation or atmosphere, some kind of self-justifying narrative, as a thought that must be obeyed. In modern psychology, there's a different technical language for some of this. Intrusive thoughts, compulsive loops, depressive cognition, trauma-related voice hearing, dissociative states, attentional capture. But the old monastic writers had already noticed that the human person can be entered, pressured, and divided through recurring mentation or stimulation. The mistake would be to say they were really doing cognitive behavioral therapy in robes. I think the deeper truth is that they were mapping interior attack at a level that we still recognize in modern day. Then comes the medieval urge to order everything. The late antique works of Pseudo-Dionysius, which I've already mentioned before, don't hand us a ready-made catalog of demons from like Dungeons and Dragons. What they do give us is something arguably more influential. Hierarchy as a kind of sacred grammar. His angelic cosmos, arranged in ordered triads, became foundational for medieval Christian thinking about celestial mediation and rank. Later scholastic reflection, especially in figures like Thomas Aquinas, receives and develops this hierarchical imagination. The result is indirect but important for demonology. Once heaven is imagined in ranks, orders, degrees, and delegated powers, hell and the demonic realm begin to be imagined in similar ways too. Not because Pseudo-Dionysius wrote a demon handbook, but because he helped normalize this idea that the invisible world has structure. This is also the medieval period in which Christian demonology merges with sexuality, sleep, reproduction, gender panic, and folklore in especially intense ways. The incubus and succubus traditions are part of that world. Demons imagined as sexual visitors, predators, or corruptors arriving in dreams and in the night. That material didn't just pop up from nowhere either. It draws on earlier anxieties about pollution, nocturnal assault, bodily vulnerability, and blurred states of consciousness. What makes it medievally Christian is the way those anxieties became morally systematized and tied to sin, confession, and demonic conspiracy. When later readers laugh at incubi and succubi, they often miss the real historical content. Not just bizarre stories, but a culture trying to explain why their bodies are being violated, why they're having unwanted desires, and the trauma of being invaded while half-conscious. By the late medieval and early modern periods, the demon had become social technology. The witch stereotype that forms in Europe is not just the person who does magic. It becomes the person imagined as having entered some kind of diabolical pact, or participated in forbidden assemblies, and aligned with anti-Christian spiritual rebellion. Historians now treat this as a constructed synthesis that spread through trials, ecclesiastical networks, print culture, and inquisitorial procedure. The result was catastrophic. Roughly 100,000 prosecuted and 40 to 60,000 executed in the early modern witch trials, with women making up the majority. The patriarchy strikes again, and suddenly demonology isn't just about spirits, it's about who can be named as adjacent to them. This is where Malleus Maleficarum enters the story. It deserves neither sensational reverence nor easy dismissal. It was not the sole cause of witch hunting, but it is one of the most well-known consolidations of what I can only call demonological misogyny. Associated especially with Heinrich Kramer, it helped align witchcraft with female sexuality, credulity, bodily weakness, and diabolical susceptibility. I'm not going to repeat its ugliness for full effect. The point is just to see how demonology can become a machine for distributing suspicion down existing lines of vulnerability. It's still happening today, just in different contexts. I know you know what I'm talking about. But once the demonic was bureaucratized, the poor, the socially marginal, the mentally distressed, and especially women became easier to classify as spiritually compromised. The demon in this regime stops being only a hidden intelligence and becomes a tool of public sorting. Then there's Demonology by James VI and First, which matters because it shows demonology folding directly into state power. James wrote in the wake of the witchcraft panic in Scotland, and with the explicit aim of proving the reality of witchcraft and demonic operations against skeptics. This is what happens when demonology enters legal imagination. Demons no longer remain just theological or monastic concerns. They become part of a system involving rulers, courts, confessions, and punishments. The hidden being now has paperwork. I think once that happens, demonology stops being about evil spirits. It's about the kinds of society that appear when suspicion of hidden spiritual subversion is institutionally authorized. Modern Christianity inherits all of this, but unevenly. The Catholic Church still teaches the reality of exorcism, but its official catechetical language is unusually cautious. The Catechism states that exorcism is directed to the expulsion of demons or liberation from demonic possession, while also insisting that psychological illness is a different matter belonging to medical science. The United States Conference of Catholic Bishops makes the same distinction and adds practical safeguards. Major exorcisms require episcopal authorization. Genuine possession is not established by self-diagnosis, and popular imagination has been badly distorted by film and television. The Church isn't abandoning demon language. You can see they're just trying, perhaps imperfectly, to keep the category of demon from becoming reckless. Orthodox practice preserves another side of the older tradition. Official Orthodox teach demonic influence and keeps exorcistic prayers, especially within baptismal rites. The point there is not always dramatic possession in the Hollywood sense, but a more encompassing renunciation of Satan and hostile powers as part of entering Christian life. In Anglican settings, the modern posture is again pretty cautious. The Church of England says diocesan deliverance teams must work with medical practitioners, psychologists, and psychiatrists, and repeatedly warns that mishandled deliverance ministry can injure vulnerable people. So modern church practice, at least in its more responsible, official forms, often looks less occult theater and more like a tense attempt to hold spiritual interpretation and clinical judgment in the same room without letting either one become total. In evangelical and charismatic settings, the language often shifts from formal exorcism to deliverance, oppression, strongholds, and spiritual warfare. Scholars of Pentecostal and charismatic Christianity note that deliverance remains integral in many of these communities, even while views vary sharply on whether a Christian can be possessed or only oppressed, harassed, or demonized in a looser sense. I think that variation is very important because it tells you that modern Christian demonology isn't just one thing. It's this kind of family of overlapping languages trying to give a name to bondage, compulsion, and spiritual conflict. At its best, that language tries to dignify experiences of domination and evil that purely secular speech sometimes doesn't recognize. And at its worst, it can over-spiritualize illness, shame the suffering, or give too much power to confident interpreters. And now we arrive at the modern problem. How do you talk about demons without becoming either credulous or smug? If you say every disturbing experience is a demon, you're probably going to harm people. If you say no one has ever used demon language to describe something real, you'll also probably fail to understand the human experience. Sleep paralysis research shows that people can wake into paralysis with a vivid sense presence, fear, and auditory or visual phenomena. Trauma spectrum research shows that voice hearing is not confined to schizophrenia and can appear in dissociative and post-traumatic contexts. The World Health Organization classification has long included trance and possession disorders in dissociative frameworks, and culturally competent mental health literature keeps warning clinicians not to treat religious interpretation as mere stupidity. The category is complicated because the experiences themselves are complicated. The humane position, then, is neither all demons are mental illness, nor all mental illness is demonic. Often, official church guidance actually helps here, because at its best, it insists on both discernment and compassion. The Catholic Catechism distinguishes exorcism from psychological illness. Anglican guidance requires consultation with clinicians. Psychiatric and pastoral literature recommends taking spiritual beliefs seriously, while also ruling out medical and psychological causes. From the outside, it might look like indecision, but it takes a lot of discipline to maintain. It recognizes that a human being may suffer at spiritual, moral, neurological, and traumatic levels all at once. The demonic remains a powerful word, not because it explains everything, but because some experiences of compulsion, degradation, hatred, and intrusive inner attack still feel bigger than a neutral symptom vocabulary presented by a therapist. Now, if we widen the frame and bring in the rest of the Hidden Being series, the pattern gets pretty strange. Greek daimons are morally mixed intermediaries. Jewish scriptural shiddim appear in the Hebrew Bible at the point where forbidden sacrifice is denounced, and the Septuagint's use of daimonia helps bend that language toward later demonization. Islamic jinn are unseen beings capable of good or evil, not simply devils. Fairies in European folklore are earth-near beings of liminal places and dangerous contact. Christian demons are not identical to any of these, and it would be easy to pretend that they are. But the family resemblance, again, is hard to miss. Hidden intelligence, altered states, temptation, ritual protection, and the possibility that contact changes you. I won't go into Jacques Vallée's work again because I know a lot of people don't buy into his larger framework, but he argues that modern anomalous encounters often share structural features with older folklore about fairies and otherworldly visitors. He didn't say all of these were the same, he just noticed that cultures around the world keep renaming encounters with apparently non-human intelligences around whatever concepts and languages around them. In one age, the visitor is a fairy, and in another a demon. Again, I'm not pushing for equivalence, just recurrence. Humans keep narrating minds that trespass into human life from somewhere just beyond consensus reality. If I was trying to put the whole thing in one sentence, I would probably say this: Christianity turned the ambiguous daimonic middle into a battlefield because it fused Jewish monotheistic exclusivity, apocalyptic conflict, and the person of Christ into one total spiritual drama. Once that happens, intermediate powers don't stay intermediate for long. They're sorted into loyal or rebellious, holy or unclean, angelic or demonic, and that moralization changes everything. The unseen goes from being just weird to soteriological. It starts becoming about salvation, worship, and the fate of the soul. But the older ambiguity never completely dies. It comes back in mystical theology, in monastic introspection, in psychiatric edge cases, in modern anomalous reports, and in the uncomfortable fact that evil often feels partly personal and partly impersonal, kind of inner and outer, which is maybe why demons remain such a durable category. They name experiences of hostile influence without requiring us to pretend that the self is some kind of sealed chamber. They say that thought can be invaded, desire can be bent, attention can be captured, and worship can be redirected. Whether you frame that metaphysically, psychologically, sacramentally, or culturally, The category survives because the actual experiences it points towards survive. And maybe that's the real eerie center of Christian demonology. We're not looking at a monster in the dark corner of a room. The demon is the name Christianity gave to the possibility that the world is full of intelligences, impulses, and agencies working on us through fear, hatred, and damaged desire. It's like a moralized battlefield version of the unseen. The daimonic middle has become war, and once you notice that, a lot of old Christian language stops sounding medieval and starts sounding like a severe, unsettling way of asking the oldest question in this whole series. Why do human beings, across cultures and centuries, keep sensing that mind is not the only mind in the room?